Thank you, Nina and Ricky. Good evening, everyone. I'm Alma Angeles for NET25 World News. On tonight's headlines. The U.S. has paused military aid to Ukraine, a decision that could have significant consequences for Kiev's ability to defend itself against Russian aggression.
President Trump has been clear that he is focused on peace. We need our partners to be committed to that goal as well. We are pausing and reviewing our aid to ensure that it is contributing to a solution.
President Trump is doubling down on his tariff threats, leaving no room for Canada or Mexico to avoid steep new trade penalties.
The tariff situation and its effect on the domestic U.S. economy are really a bigger concern now that we have a more aggressive stance coming out of Washington. And that being said, the stagflation issue is rearing its head. And stagflation is quite simply a stagnant or if not rising, a stable inflation rate, but a declining economic base. And
the news starts now. More fallout from that contentious meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump has now ordered his administration to pause military aid to Ukraine. Thomas I. Likeness for more.
According to a White House official, the suspension of military help is immediate. The official says the U.S. is pausing and reviewing aid to ensure it's contributing to a solution. According to Bloomberg and Fox News reports, the pause will last until Trump determines Ukraine's leaders demonstrate what he calls a good faith commitment to peace. During the Oval Office dust-up last Friday, Trump pushed Zelensky to accept a ceasefire but would not provide any security guarantees to prevent Russia from breaking the agreement. Trump got offended when Zelensky suggested Russian President Vladimir Putin cannot be trusted. He called Zelensky disrespectful and ungrateful to America for its help. And he continued with that theme on Monday.
Well, I just think he should be more appreciative because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us.
It appears Trump is trying to back Ukraine into a corner with this pause, forcing Kyiv to take a deal that could leave it defenseless against Russia. Trump also addressed Zelensky's statement that the war could go on for a long time.
President Zelensky supposedly made a statement today in AP. I'm not a big fan of AP, so maybe it was an incorrect statement, but he said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right about that.
Trump posted on Truth Social that he's running out of patience and America will not put up with Zelensky's defiance much longer. But that's unlikely to change Zelensky's mind. The Ukrainian president says there can be no peace agreement without security guarantees.
The lack of security guarantees for Ukraine 11 years ago allowed Russia to begin with the occupation of Crimea and the war in Donbass. Later, the absence of security guarantees enabled Russia to launch a full-scale invasion. And now, due to the lack of clear security guarantees, Russia is keeping this war ongoing. The whole world sees this, and the whole world acknowledges it.
Zelensky says Ukraine is working with its European allies on a deal that includes security for Kyiv, and he says that agreement will bring peace closer. Back in Washington, Democratic lawmakers are condemning the decision to pause funding. They call it reckless, indefensible, and a direct threat to America's security. In his haste to end the war in Ukraine, Trump has clearly come down on the side of Russia, and that has European allies of the U.S. worried. They fear Moscow will take a more aggressive stance, threatening the security of EU nations. Thomas I. Likeness, NET25 World News.
The U.S. has paused military aid to Ukraine, a decision that could have significant consequences for Kiev's ability to defend itself against Russian aggression. Historian and supply chain expert Marco Durante says the move could have far-reaching implications for Ukraine.
Implications are extraordinary because the U.S. gives almost half of the total aid that has been given to Ukraine, slightly less than what Europe, including the European Union institutions, have given to the country. A lot of the aid that Europe has given, as with the US, has been financial and humanitarian. We look at military spending alone, the US has given twice the amount that the Europeans have, in addition to critical intelligence assistance as well. So the impact would be enormous on Ukraine. I don't see any scenario in which Zelensky is going to be able to stand on his current position without making some concessions to the Americans.
Durante also suggests this decision may not have been made on a whim, but was likely part of a broader discussions with the Trump administration.
Yeah, I think the meeting gave cover to the Trump administration to suspend aid. I think it's inconceivable that there were not talks within the administration regarding this possibility between top security officials and defense officials. Something like this doesn't just occur out of the blue.
The pause in aid is also being viewed as a win for Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I think it's absolutely a win for Putin. This is something that Putin could only have dreamed of even just a week or a month ago. We've seen events hurl forward at a shocking speed, and Putin has so far gotten everything he could have wanted.
In Europe, leaders may rally around Ukraine in solidarity in the short term, but Durante warns of potential long-term challenges.
In the short run, I believe this will bring European leaders together and will bring the leaders of Western Europe together with those of Central and Eastern Europe in solidarity and in support of Ukraine. I think in the long run, we have to consider the internal dynamics within European countries and the positions of populist parties on the far right and the far left, who are already voicing skepticism, if not outright opposition, to additional aid to Ukraine, and think about the possibility of growing support for these parties, particularly given the financial burden.
As for peace negotiations, Durante questions whose terms they will favor.
Well, it's a question of peace on whose terms. If it's peace on Putin's terms, we're a lot closer to that outcome. If it's peace on the terms of the Ukrainians or the Europeans, we're a lot farther from that outcome.
This pause in aid raises broader questions about U.S. foreign policy and its long-term objectives in Europe.
I think one question is whether Donald Trump is out to destroy the European Union. This is something that has been suggested within the European press and apparently is a subject of discussion behind closed doors in Europe. And Trump has described the European Union as having been invented in order to undermine the United States. He used a lot more vulgar language than that. So we have to consider what Trump's long-term objectives are. We know that J.D. Vance has already suggested, a real withdrawal of support for Ukraine. Elon Musk has just announced that he was in favor of the U.S. withdrawing from NATO. But there's this question of what's going to happen to the European Union and the support that the Trump administration, or at least figures around the administration, are given to these far-right populist parties.
With no clear timeline for resuming aid, Ukraine faces mounting uncertainty as it continues its fight against Russian forces.
We will continue to work with the U.S., with the U.S. Congress, with President Trump's administration, with President Trump, through all available diplomatic channels in a calm manner, in order for Ukraine and the U.S. to continue our fight for fair, long-lasting, stable peace in Ukraine and on the European continent.
Тривалий, стабільний мир в Україні, на європейському континенті. Звісно ж, ми розраховуємо на підтримку Сполучених Штатів, оскільки...
Of course, we count on the U.S. support, because the significant amount of support including intelligence exchange and the important element air defense, the protection of our skies, cities, civil infrastructure, Ukrainian civilians, this is U.S. contribution. These are important elements that had saved thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of Ukrainian lives, both civilian and military.
як цивільних, так і військових. Ми, повторю,
We, I repeat, are thankful to the Americans, to the American nation. We are ready to sign the minerals deal that is prepared about the creation of the investment fund to start working with the U.S. on an absolutely pragmatic economic base.
Абсолютно на прагматичній економічній основі.
Democratic lawmakers are pressing the Pentagon for answers after reports surfaced that offensive U.S. cyber operations against Russia have been paused. Now, the move ordered by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth comes as the Trump administration pursues negotiations to end the war in Ukraine, a conflict that has strained global relations.
Our allies will also watch in horror as Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth make America less safe. It's the world less safe. There's no other way you can look at it when they give Putin a free pass to launch cyber attacks against the U.S. while we disarm our own cyber operations against Russia. Can you believe that? Letting Putin attack us, and we're saying we won't attack him in terms of cyber warfare. What is going on? The world's turned inside out and upside down, all to the detriment of the safety and security of America and its people. Tomorrow, as Donald Trump addresses our nation, our Western allies will wonder about the future of NATO. So these are difficult and dangerous times, and Donald Trump is taking America, our democracy, and the world down a dark and deeply troubling path.
During sensitive diplomatic talks, this particular pause has sparked debate. Some argue it's a tactical move to avoid derailing negotiations, while others worry it might compromise national security by reducing pressure on Russian cyber activities. President Trump is doubling down on his tariff threats, leaving no room for Canada or Mexico to avoid steep new trade penalties. Now, starting today, a 25% tariff on imports from both countries is officially in effect as the administration pushes for tougher action on border security and drug control. The looming deadline sent shockwaves through financial markets, with the Dow plunging nearly 650 points and the S&P 500 seeing its worst losses since December. And Trump isn't stopping there. He's also signaling plans for more reciprocal tariffs starting next month. For now, Canada and Mexico are bracing for the economic fallout, while businesses and consumers prepare for higher prices and potential disruptions. Take a look.
Fresh trade wars kicked off Tuesday between the US and its top three trading partners, Canada, Mexico, and China, with new steep tariffs from Washington taking effect and triggering retaliation. On Monday night, US President Donald Trump accused all three targeted countries of failing to stop the flow of fentanyl into the US. Just after midnight on the US East Coast, Canadian and Mexican goods were hit with tariffs of 25%.
On the tariffs, is there any room left for Canada and Mexico to make a deal before midnight?
No room left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow.
And Trump's new tariffs on Chinese goods were doubled by an extra 10% to a cumulative 20%. Those new tariffs will apply to some major consumer electronics imported by the US, previously untouched by prior duties, including laptops, video game consoles, and Bluetooth devices. On Tuesday, China announced its own tariffs of 10 to 15%, mostly targeting US agriculture like soybeans, meats, and cotton, and added new export restrictions for designated US entities. Speaking to reporters Tuesday, a Chinese parliamentary spokesperson said China was willing to resolve US concerns through consultation and dialogue, but will not accept threats and oppression. Meanwhile, US tariffs on goods from Mexico and Canada will likely cause deeper repercussions for the highly integrated North American economy. Canada and Mexico have for decades enjoyed a virtually tariff-free trading relationship with the US. After Trump confirmed tariffs would proceed, financial markets reeled and global stocks tumbled. Both the Canadian dollar and Mexican peso fell against the US dollar. Automaker shares fell sharply, especially for major firms, General Motors and Ford, who have production lines in Mexico. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said on Monday Ottawa would hit back with 25% tariffs. on up to about $107 billion worth of U.S. goods. Mexico's economy ministry said President Claudia Sheinbaum is expected to announce her response Tuesday. On Tuesday, markets responded to the news with stocks falling and bond yields sliding across Asia and Japan's Nikkei closing down 1.2%. Trump's America First agenda, aimed at redrawing trade relationships in favor of the U.S., is expected to be a centerpiece of his Tuesday night address to a joint session of Congress.
Tariffs imposed by former U.S. President Donald Trump are sparking concerns about a potential economic slowdown. Chris Brigatti, Chief Investment Officer at SWBC, warns that these tariffs could lead to a challenging scenario known as stagflation. Here, prices rise, but economic growth stalls. Take a look.
I think the tariff scenario is definitively an inflationary aspect to what can happen within the economy and the market. But broadly speaking, I don't think we've really gotten to the point where the Fed has completed their task, and they'll admit that themselves. So to the point where we need to see continued decline in the inflation picture, we need more things to happen for the economy to feel robust enough to be able to weather any storms. Right now, what I'm seeing is and hearing is a little bit of a stagflation concern. Slowing growth with a stable or increasing inflationary environment, that's really not a robust situation, and should be really careful as a consumer, as a market participant, to be wary of things that could really negatively affect portfolios as a result of a stagflationary environment.
China today swiftly retaliated against fresh U.S. tariffs, announcing 10 to 15% hikes to import levies, covering a range of American agricultural and food products, moving the world's top two economies a step closer toward an all-out trade war. Take a look. After Donald Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on Chinese imports, Beijing has announced its own tariffs on American agricultural and food products, ranging from 10 to 15%. This move brings the world's two largest economies closer to a full-blown trade war. A Chinese parliamentary spokesperson made it clear that while they're open to talking things out, they won't back down in the face of threats or pressure.
Trade between nations should be conducted in accordance with the rules of the World Trade Organization, and trade disputes should also be resolved within the WTO framework. The unilateral imposition of tariffs by the U.S. violates WTO rules and disrupts the security and stability of global industrial and supply chains. We hope that the U.S. will work with China in the same direction and find solutions through equal consultations. China is willing to strengthen cooperation with countries around the world to jointly safeguard the hard-won multilateral trading system, oppose unilateralism and protectionism, and work together to promote inclusive and beneficial economic globalization.
China has also put 25 U.S. companies on notice, restricting their imports and investments due to national security concerns. 10 of these firms were specifically targeted for selling arms to Taiwan, which China claims as its own territory. Interestingly, Beijing chose not to go after big-name U.S. brands this time around. The situation is tense, with both sides digging in and the global economy watching nervously. The global trade landscape is shifting rapidly as China retaliates against fresh U.S. tariffs, escalating tensions between the two economic superpowers. Take a look. Beijing announced 10 to 15% tariff hikes on American agricultural and food products, including soybeans, pork, and beef, and placed 25 U.S. firms under export and investment restrictions on national security grounds. Supply chain expert Cameron Johnson says these developments signal a dramatic change in the global order.
So the world order of yesterday is not the world order of today. With U.S. actions, particularly with tariffs against China and the challenges with Ukraine, what we're seeing is actually a fundamental shift into a new order. We don't really understand what that is at the moment. For example, Europe is going to try to get closer to China and other U.S. allies such as Japan and Australia. China is also going to try to get closer to those allies by offering its markets, but also products. And so we don't know how exactly the strategy is moving forward. I think one of the important things to realize is, though, what we assumed was a global order, both on economics and great power competition, has completely changed in today's world.
Johnson also noted that countries like Europe, Japan, and Australia are recalibrating their strategies to strengthen ties with both the U.S. and China. China's response follows President Trump's to double tariffs on Chinese goods from 10 to 20%, with plans for further increases to 60%. Now, Johnson explains that while some companies may start considering supply chain shifts at higher tariff levels, the impact remains uncertain for now.
We're still on track to 60%. At the moment, with 20%, it just barely moves the needle for companies wanting to move potential supply chains out of the country. At 35%, we start to see that companies will start to move or consider other strategies moving forward. We still don't know exactly how that response will look like, but companies such as Apple, for example, will have limited options just because of the mass scale production they have here.
Despite rising tensions, Johnson believes China is taking a calculated approach rather than overreacting.
We're in a kind of trade war. I think what the U.S. is trying to do is use tariffs to gain leverage, particularly over trading partners it sees as disadvantaging itself. But China is not overreacting. I think China is trying to take some time to understand exactly what's going on and also find ways to respond in kind, but without hurting its overall exports.
And a developing story out of the Carolinas, wildfires are wreaking havoc across the Carolinas with dry, windy conditions, fueling dozens of blazes that erupted over the weekend. Take a look. South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster has declared a state of emergency as firefighters battle more than 175 fires statewide, including a massive 1,600-acre blaze near Myrtle Beach. Evacuation orders were issued for several neighborhoods, though some residents have since been allowed to return home. In North Carolina, crews are working to contain multiple fires, including a 500-acre blaze in Polk County near the South Carolina border. Strong winds and critically dry conditions have made the fight especially challenging, with officials warning of elevated fire risks across the region. Despite the intensity of the fires, no injuries or structural losses have been reported so far. Firefighters continue to make progress, but with more than 200 wildfires reported across both states, it's a race against time to prevent further devastation. Thousands of residents in northeastern Japan have been forced to evacuate as the country battles its largest wildfire in decades near the city of Ofunatu. The fire, which started on February 26, has now spread across more than 2,600 hectares, fueled by record low rainfall and strong winds. Aerial footage shows thick white smoke and flames tearing through forested areas. Firefighters and military helicopters have been working around the clock, but water bombing operations are limited to daylight hours. And so far, over 4,500 people have been evacuated, with many homes destroyed.
We have received a donation from the Los Angeles Dodgers Roki Sasaki, Japanese baseball player, of 10 million yen, $67,020, in cash and 500 sets of bedding as a disaster relief.
Local teacher Marie Nakawatari shared heartbreaking stories from students at an evacuation center, some of whom have lost everything.
Some students are very discouraged and heartbroken. One showed me a picture of their house burning down and said to me, "There's nothing left." Another said, "Even if I get into a high school, I don't know where I could stay for that."
Officials say this wildfire surpasses the previous record set in 1992, highlighting the growing risks of extreme weather linked to climate change. Taiwan's Defense Minister Wellington Koo is reassuring that the U.S. won't abandon the Indo-Pacific, calling it a core national interest. Now, this comes amid concerns about U.S. commitment to Taiwan following a tense meeting between President Trump and Ukraine's President Zelensky. Take a look.
Maintaining the status quo and peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is a consensus we have with the United States. We have a common goal. We are using deterrence and strength to achieve peace. So we believe that from this perspective, I believe the U.S. will not give up the Indo-Pacific region. It will not want any war to happen in the Indo-Pacific either and cause it to lose the Indo-Pacific region and suffer such a significant loss. From an economic point of view, as what was just mentioned, and judging from Taiwan's geopolitical and strategic position and the military security preparations required for the United States, I do not think the United States can afford to lose the Indo-Pacific.
And the news continues here on NET25. We'll be right back. President Donald Trump, joined by TSMC CEO C.C. Wei, unveiled a groundbreaking $100 billion investment to build 5 new semiconductor manufacturing facilities in Arizona. The announcement made at the White House marks the largest foreign direct investment in U.S. history and is expected to create thousands of high-paying jobs. Trump emphasized the importance of reducing reliance on imported chips, calling the move vital for national security and economic growth. Take a look.
Donald Trump says chip giant TSMC has agreed to invest $100 billion in building 5 new facilities in the U.S. He made the announcement Monday, standing alongside the boss of the Taiwan firm, C.C. Wei.
This $100 billion in new investment will go into building 5 cutting-edge fabrication facilities in the great state that we just discussed, Arizona, and will create thousands of jobs, many thousands of jobs, and they're high-paying jobs. In total, today's announcement brings Taiwan semiconductor investments to about $165 billion they've started already.
TSMC is the world's largest contract chip maker and a supplier to major US firms like NVIDIA. It already has facilities in Arizona and says the new plan will create 40,000 construction jobs over the next 4 years. The company didn't give a detailed timeline for the investments. Trump said the deal was vital to making the US less reliant on imported chips.
We must be able to build the chips and semiconductors that we need right here in American factories with American skill and American labor. And that's exactly what we're doing. As you know, Taiwan pretty much has a monopoly on that market. And I think pretty much is not a term that's even appropriate. They do have a monopoly. And this is a tremendous move by the most powerful company in the world.
For Trump, the announcement is meant to show he is fulfilling election pledges to create jobs and support industry. It follows a string of similar announcements, including a promise by Apple to invest $500 billion in the US over 4 years. Now TSMC might also have a hand in saving troubled US rival Intel. Trump administration officials say they have spoken to the firm about taking a stake in the US chipmaker's factory unit. On Monday, TSMC would only say that it looked forward to discussing ways to bolster the technology industry. Shares in the firm fell around 2% in early trade Tuesday following the previous day's news.
Amsterdam's Van Gogh Museum and Lego have unveiled a unique collaboration, a brick-built rendition of Van Gogh's iconic Sunflowers painting. This 2,615-piece set allows fans to recreate the masterpiece at home, complete with adjustable sunflower petals.
The great thing is that people can actually build it themselves and kind of build up a composition in a way that a painter builds up a composition, and in that way I think they will engage very directly with the life story and the work of Vincent van Gogh as an artist, and with this very special painting in our collection.
Lego designer Steen Oom worked closely with the museum to bring this vision to life.
I think what was the most challenging, but also one of the most exciting parts of this project, I think, was definitely trying to find the right balance in colors.
our Lego color palette is relatively limited. It was really not trying to find exactly the right color match, but more so the overarching theme of colors and the right balance between all the colors.
The Lego Sunflowers is now available, bringing a piece of art history into homes around the world. And with that, we end tonight's broadcast. For everyone here on NET25, I'm Alma Angeles. Thank you for joining us. Good night.